Hello, welcome to Whisper Tales. Tonight, I invite you to a place where starlight touches ancient forests and the whispers of the past linger in the cool mountain air. We will journey together to Rivendell, the sanctuary of elves, where legends are born and the course of destiny is set. Here, in this valley of timeless beauty, the seeds of a great undertaking are sown, an alliance of the brave and the bold, the kind-hearted and the unyielding. But first, let us pause. Close your eyes and take a deep breath. Feel the weight of the world lift, if only for a moment, as we step into the gentle flow of this story. Imagine the sound of a distant waterfall, its melody weaving through the tall trees of Rivendell. The moonlight casts silver shadows on the stone paths, and the air is alive with a quiet hum, a song of hope, fragile yet unbroken. This is the beginning of the Fellowship of the Ring. A fellowship born not of ease but of necessity, bound by a mission to carry a terrible burden into the very heart of darkness. 9 companions, each with their own strengths, flaws, and secrets, will come together to defy the rising shadow of Sauron. At their center stands a figure cloaked in gray, with eyes like deep wells of wisdom and a voice that carries the weight of centuries. This is Gandalf the Grey, the quiet architect of their unity and the keeper of their fragile hope. It is here, in Rivendell, under the watchful eyes of Elrond and the ancient stars, that the story of the Fellowship begins. Their journey will be fraught with peril and heartbreak, but also moments of light that will shine all the brighter for the darkness surrounding them. So sit back, relax, and let the story unfold. As we walk these paths together, you'll hear not just of great deeds and noble sacrifices, but of the bonds that form when light and shadow collide. The Fellowship awaits, and their story is about to begin. The Fellowship of the Ring was not born in triumph or ease. It was forged in the shadow of a rising darkness, a fragile yet unyielding alliance bound by purpose and peril. In the hallowed halls of Rivendell, where the wisdom of ages flows like a river, this fellowship came into being, not as a mere gathering of warriors, but as a symbol of unity in a world fractured by fear. Imagine a chamber lit by the soft glow of elven torches, their light dancing on the polished stone walls. Around a long table sit figures from every corner of Middle-earth. Elves, with their ageless beauty, stand in quiet dignity. Dwarves, stout and unyielding, speak with voices like the rumble of deep earth. Men, carrying the weight of their fragile kingdoms, gaze with cautious determination. And there, amidst these towering presences, sit the smallest of all, hobbits, whose simple lives have been swept into the tide of history. At the center of it all lies the One Ring, a small, unassuming circle of gold that seems to pulse with its own dark heartbeat. Its presence fills the room with a quiet tension, a reminder of the immense power it holds and the danger it poses. Each person present feels the ring's weight in their own way, a temptation, a fear, a burden too great for one soul to bear. Yet, in this moment of uncertainty, a voice rises above the silence. Gandalf the Grey speaks, not with the booming command of a general, but with the steady assurance of a guide who has walked these paths before. His words are like the roots of a great tree, grounding those around him, reminding them that even in the face of overwhelming darkness, there is strength to be found in unity. The task ahead is not for one, he says, his voice carrying the quiet power of certainty. No sword, no shield, no spell can bear this burden alone. It will take all of us, each bringing what strength we can, to see this through. Thus, the Fellowship was formed. 9 companions, each representing the varied peoples of Middle-earth, each carrying their own fears, doubts, and hopes. Frodo, the reluctant ring-bearer, whose courage lies in his unshakable spirit. Aragorn, the exiled heir, whose quiet leadership hides a destiny yet to be claimed. Legolas and Gimli, the elf and dwarf, sworn to overcome the ancient grudges of their people. Boromir, a man torn between duty and temptation, and Sam, Merry, and Pippin, the hobbits who carry with them the light of home. But this fellowship was more than the sum of its parts. It was a fragile yet powerful thread of trust, spun across the chasm of old hatreds and fears. Gandalf knew that their mission, to carry the ring to Mount Doom, to destroy it in the fires from which it was forged, could not succeed without this bond. The Fellowship of the Ring was not perfect. It would falter, it would fracture, and it would face trials that no alliance should endure. Yet, in its imperfection lay its strength. For it was not born of power, but of courage, not of certainty, but of hope. Rivendell, the hidden refuge of the elves, was a place unlike any other in Middle-earth. Nestled within a valley of cascading waterfalls and surrounded by evergreen trees, it was a sanctuary where time seemed to stand still. Here, the cares of the outside world were softened by the music of streams, the rustle of ancient leaves, and the ever-present hum of elven songs. It was in this sacred haven that the Fellowship of the Ring would take its first breath, and with a heavy burden of the One Ring would be revealed in all its dread and consequence. Imagine walking through Rivendell's winding paths. The air is cool and fragrant, filled with the scent of blooming flowers and mossy stone. Starlight filters through the branches, casting dapple patterns on the ground, and every step feels like a journey through an ancient dream. The halls of Elrond's home were filled with knowledge preserved from the earliest days of the world. Scrolls and tomes, maps and artifacts, each speaks of victories and losses, of joy and sorrow that shape Middle-earth. The elves who dwell here are quiet and graceful, their wisdom evident in their serene gazes. They are the keepers of history, and Rivendell itself is a repository of all that is beautiful and enduring. For Gandalf, Rivendell was more than a refuge. It was a place of counsel and clarity, where he could gather his thoughts and seek the advice of Elrond, one of the wisest beings in Middle-earth. Together, they stood on the threshold of a decision that would change the fate of the world. The Valley of Rivendell became a crossroads for the free peoples of Middle-earth. Elves arrived from Lothlorien, their cloaks shimmering like morning mist. Dwarves traveled from the lonely mountain, their heavy steps echoing with the sound of stone. Men from distant lands rode with purpose, their cloaks worn and dusty from the long journey. And then, of course, there were the hobbits. Frodo Baggins, wearied from his perilous journey with the ring, was joined by his loyal companions Sam, Merry, and Pippin. To the elves of Rivendell, these small figures seemed out of place, fragile, unassuming, and utterly unsuited for the challenges ahead. Yet Gandalf saw in them a strength that would one day astonish even the most hardened hearts. As the many gathered in Rivendell's great hall, a sense of both gravity and hope filled the air. Here, in this place of timeless beauty, a decision would be made that would ripple across all the lands of Middle-earth. For those who came to Rivendell, the valley was not merely a refuge, it was a place of renewal. Wounds healed more quickly, weary minds found solace, and heavy hearts grew lighter. It was as if the very air carried a magic that soothed and restored. This renewal extended beyond the physical. In Rivendell, even the most jaded spirits could find a glimmer of hope. It was this magic, the quiet yet unyielding power of peace and beauty, that made Rivendell the perfect place for the Fellowship to begin its journey. In the great hall of Rivendell, where sunlight filtered through intricately carved arches and the scent of ancient cedar lingered in the air, a gathering of immense importance was underway. The Council of Elrond was called, bringing together representatives from the free peoples of Middle-earth. Though their paths had been different, their purpose was now aligned, to decide the fate of the One Ring. The room was filled with an air of quiet tension as elves, dwarves, men, and hobbits took their places. Elrond, wise and serene, presided over the council. His gaze swept across those assembled, each carrying their own burdens, hopes, and doubts. There was Aragorn, the Ranger of the North, seated with the calm presence of one who carried more responsibility than he let on. At his side sat Boromir, a man of Gondor, whose proud demeanor could not entirely mask the flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. Opposite them, Legolas of the Woodland Realm sat in quiet dignity, while Gimli, son of Gloin, held his axe tightly, as if prepared for a challenge even in this place of peace. And then, of course, there were the hobbits, Frodo, whose small frame bore the immense burden of the ring, Sam, who stayed close by his master's side, and in the shadows, Merry and Pippin, their curiosity tempered by an unspoken resolve to support their friend. As the council began, voices rose and fell in a dance of argument and debate. The question was simple in theory but monumental in consequence: what should be done with the One Ring? Some argue for using the ring against Sauron, wielding its immense power as a weapon of resistance. Others vehemently oppose this idea, warning that the ring could corrupt even the noblest hearts. Boromir, his voice steady but insistent, spoke of Gondor's struggles and the need for strength to withstand the forces of Mordor. "It is a gift," he declared, his eyes alight with ambition. "Why not use it to defend our lands, to destroy the enemy with his own weapon?" Gimli, with his blunt honesty, suggested destroying the ring outright. "Then what are we waiting for?" he said, standing abruptly and lifting his axe. But as he brought it down upon the ring, a deafening clang echoed through the chamber, and his axe shattered into splinters. The ring remained, untouched and unyielding, a silent testament to its indestructible nature. Elrond's voice cut through the rising discord. "The ring cannot be wielded, nor can it be destroyed by any craft we here possess. It was made in the fires of Mount Doom, and there alone can it be unmade." The room fell silent. Mount Doom, deep in the heart of Mordor, under the watchful eye of Sauron. The prospect of venturing into such a place seemed impossible, a task that none could hope to survive. As the weight of the decision pressed upon the council, Gandalf sat quietly, his eyes fixed on Frodo. He knew the hobbit was listening, absorbing every word, every doubt, and every fear. Frodo, who had already carried the ring so far, now faced a choice that no one else could make. Finally, in a voice that trembled yet carried an undeniable resolve, Frodo spoke. "I will take the ring," he said, the words falling into the room like stones into still water. "I will take it to Mordor, though I do not know the way." The council was stunned into silence. Gandalf's face softened, a mix of pride and sadness. "If you carry this burden, Frodo," he said gently, "you shall not do so alone." One by one, others stepped forward. Aragorn, rising to his full height, placed a hand on Frodo's shoulder. "If by my life or death I can protect you, I will. You have my sword." Legolas followed, his voice steady. "And you have my bow and my axe," Gimli declared, his loyalty outweighing his earlier doubts. Even Merry and Pippin, despite their small size and inexperience, refused to be left behind. "We're coming too," Pippin said, his voice firm despite the hint of fear in his eyes. "You need people of intelligence on this sort of mission. Well, that rules me out," he added with a nervous laugh. Thus, the Fellowship of the Ring was formed, a group of 9 companions, each bound by the shared burden of protecting Frodo and seeing the ring destroyed. As the Council of Elrond continued, the room buzzed with tension. Each voice, though distinct in tone and intent, carried the weight of centuries of history, rivalry, and grief. The task at hand, deciding the fate of the One Ring, seemed insurmountable, and old wounds among the peoples of Middle-earth threatened to tear the fragile alliance apart before it could even begin. Legolas, the prince of the woodland realm, spoke of his people's vigilance against the dark forces creeping into their forests. "The shadow spreads ever closer to our borders," he said, his voice calm but resolute. "And yet, we have held our ground." But no sooner had he spoken than Gimli interrupted, his tone sharp. "Held your ground? While we fought goblins and orcs in the mines, the elves sang songs under the stars." The tension between elves and dwarves was as old as the mountains, and the air between Legolas and Gimli bristled with unspoken grievances. Gandalf, watching silently, let the exchange play out for a moment. He knew that these conflicts would not be resolved overnight, but believed that unity forged in discord could prove unbreakable. Among the race of men, the divisions were less visible but no less deep. Boromir of Gondor, burdened by his people's desperate struggle against Mordor's encroaching forces, rose to speak. "Gondor has held the line for generations," he declared, his voice heavy with pride and frustration. "While others hid in their forests or mountains, we stood as a bulwark against the enemy. And yet, now you ask us to destroy the one weapon that could ensure our victory?" Aragorn, seated nearby, remained quiet at first, but his very presence seemed to unsettle Boromir. When Aragorn finally spoke, his words were measured, yet firm. "The ring cannot be wielded, Boromir. It will corrupt even the strongest among us. That is its nature." Boromir turned toward Aragorn, his eyes narrowing. "And who are you to lecture me on strength? A ranger, wandering the wilds?" It was Elrond who answered, his voice cutting through the growing tension. "He is Aragorn, son of Arathorn, the heir of Isildur. And he is not without his burdens." Boromir fell silent, though his expression betrayed his doubt. The lineage of Isildur, the very man who had failed to destroy the ring when he had the chance, cast a long shadow. Aragorn felt its weight more than anyone, yet he bore it with quiet dignity. As the arguments continued, the ring itself seemed to exert a quiet influence over the room. The air grew heavier, the shadows deeper, and the temper sharper. Gandalf, who had been listening intently, finally rose to speak. "The ring is treacherous," he said, his voice carrying the calm authority of one who understood its danger better than most. "Its power is an illusion, a snare that will lead even the mightiest to ruin. We must destroy it. There is no other way." His words hung in the air, and for a moment the council fell silent. Even Boromir, his pride still simmering, seemed to consider Gandalf's warning. Amid the tension and discord, Frodo sat quietly, his eyes fixed on the ring. He had carried it thus far, and its weight, both physical and spiritual, was beginning to take its toll. Yet, as he listened to the others argue, a quiet resolve began to form within him. When the moment came, it was Frodo who broke the silence. "I will take the ring," he said, his voice steady despite the trembling in his hands. "Though I do not know the way." The room turned to him in astonishment. Gandalf's face softened with pride, and even those who doubted the hobbit could see the courage burning in his eyes. Amid the clamor of voices and the weight of old rivalries, it was Gandalf's wisdom and calm resolve that steered the Council of Elrond toward its ultimate decision. He understood better than anyone the gravity of their task and the delicate balance required to forge an alliance that could withstand the trials ahead. As tempers flared and ancient grievances threatened to derail the council, Gandalf rose to speak. His voice, though not loud, carried the weight of centuries, and the room gradually fell silent. "You speak of power," he began, his gaze shifting from Boromir to the dwarves, then to the elves, as though it were a tool to be wielded. But the ring's power is unlike any other. It does not serve, it enslaves. To keep it is to invite ruin, not just for yourselves, but for all of Middle-earth. His words hung heavy in the air, cutting through the fear and ambition that had clouded the discussion. Gandalf's tone was not accusatory, but filled with a deep sadness, as if he could already see the path of destruction the ring might lead them down. Gandalf then shifted his focus to the need for unity. "We come from different lands, with different struggles," he said, his voice softening. "But the shadow we face does not discriminate. Sauron's darkness will consume all, whether you dwell in the mountains, the forests, or the plains." Turning to Legolas and Gimli, he continued, "The elves and dwarves once stood together in friendship. That bond was broken, but bonds can be reforged. Then, to Aragorn and Boromir, the race of men has faltered, but it has not fallen. Together, we can find strength beyond what any one of us possesses alone." His words were not a command, but an invitation, a call to set aside pride and fear for the sake of something greater. Slowly, the seeds of trust began to take root among those gathered. When Frodo, in his quiet bravery, declared that he would take the ring to Mordor, Gandalf's heart swelled with both pride and sorrow. He knew the burden Frodo had taken upon himself, and though he wished he could spare the hobbit such a fate, he also knew that Frodo was the only one who could bear it. "You have chosen freely, Frodo," Gandalf said, his voice filled with solemn respect. "And that choice alone makes you stronger than any weapon forged in Middle-earth." As Frodo's declaration settled over the council, the others began to step forward. Aragorn offered his sword, Legolas his bow, Gimli his axe. Boromir, though reluctant, pledged to protect Frodo, and Sam leapt to his feet, unwilling to let his master go alone. Merry and Pippin followed, their youthful determination shining brightly against the gathering gloom. Gandalf watched as the fellowship took shape, a smile touching the corners of his mouth. This was the unity he had worked so hard to foster, not perfect, not without tension, but strong in its diversity and shared purpose. As the Fellowship of the Ring left the sanctuary of Rivendell, a hush seemed to settle over the valley. The world outside awaited them with its dangers and shadows, yet within the Elven Haven there was an unspoken hope. The Fellowship's departure marked the beginning of a journey that would test their courage, their unity, and their resolve. Elrond stood at the gates of Rivendell, his expression serene yet solemn. "The road you take is fraught with peril," he said, his voice resonating with quiet authority. "But know this, the hope of all free peoples rests upon you. Go with the blessings of Rivendell and the strength of your unity." Each member of the Fellowship carried their own thoughts as they passed through the gates. Frodo felt the weight of the ring pressing against his chest, a burden heavier than he had imagined. Sam, ever at his side, was filled with both apprehension and determination. Aragorn, walking at the head of the group, kept his hand near the hilt of his sword, his keen eyes scanning the horizon for signs of danger. Gandalf, bringing up the rear, paused for a moment to look back at Rivendell. The valley shimmered with a light that seemed eternal, untouched by the encroaching darkness of Sauron's shadow. He allowed himself a brief moment of reflection before turning forward. His path was clear, and there was no time to linger in the comfort of the past. The Fellowship's journey began with a trek through the rolling hills and dense woodlands near Rivendell. The air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of pine and earth, but an undercurrent of unease rippled through the group. Though they had just begun, the reality of their mission loomed large. "Where are we headed first?" Pippin asked, his voice breaking the silence. He looked to Gandalf, whose staff tapped steadily against the ground as they walked. "To the south," Gandalf replied, his tone thoughtful. "The road to Mordor is long, and each step must be taken with care. Our first task is simply to remain unseen." The hobbits exchanged uneasy glances, the weight of the journey settling over them. The others, Aragorn, Legolas, Gimli, and Boromir, remained silent, each lost in their own thoughts. As the days passed, the fellowship began to know one another more deeply. Aragorn shared quiet words with Boromir, their conversations veering between strategy and the struggles of their respective peoples. Legolas and Gimli, though wary of one another, found moments of mutual respect, small gestures that hinted at a bond that might one day flourish. The hobbits brought lightness to the journey, their laughter and songs breaking the tension of the long days. Merry and Pippin, in particular, seemed determined to find joy in even the smallest moments, much to the amusement of their companions. And then there was Frodo. Though he carried the greatest burden, his quiet courage began to inspire those around him. Gandalf watched him closely, offering guidance when needed but never imposing. He knew that Frodo's strength would come from within, and that the journey itself would shape him into the leader Middle-earth needed. Though the journey began in relative peace, danger was never far behind. On a moonlit night, as the fellowship camped near a cluster of ancient ruins, Aragorn's sharp ears caught the faint sound of hoofbeats in the distance. "Black Riders?" Frodo whispered, his voice trembling. Aragorn shook his head. "Not here. But there are others who may be watching." Gandalf stepped forward, his staff glowing faintly in the darkness. "We are not pursued yet," he said, his tone calm but firm. "But we must move swiftly and keep to the hidden paths. The enemy's eyes are everywhere." The fellowship packed their camp in silence, their steps quickening as they moved under the cover of night. The brief encounter served as a reminder their mission would not go unnoticed, and every step toward Mordor would be shadowed by peril. As the fellowship traveled further from Rivendell, the journey began to shape them, not only as individuals but as a group. The wilderness of Middle-earth, with its vast landscapes and hidden dangers, tested their endurance and their trust in one another. And in these trials, the bonds between the 9 companions slowly began to form, sometimes through shared laughter, and other times through shared peril. At first, their differences were as sharp as the rocks beneath their feet. Gimli, with his gruff manner and unyielding pride, often clashed with Legolas, whose elven grace and aloof demeanor seemed a world apart from the dwarf's grounded nature. Boromir, proud and headstrong, struggled to see the quiet strength of Frodo and his fellow hobbits. Yet, Gandalf, ever watchful, allowed these tensions to surface, knowing that bonds formed through conflict often became the strongest of all. He intervened only when necessary, offering a steadying hand or a wise word to ease the friction. "Patience," Gandalf said one evening as he sat with Frodo by the campfire. "Differences can divide, yes, but they can also teach. Trust in the road, Frodo, it has a way of bringing hearts together, even those most at odds." Despite their struggles, moments of levity began to thread their way into the fellowship's journey. Merry and Pippin, ever the mischief makers, found ways to lighten the mood. On one occasion, they convinced Gimli to teach them a dwarven drinking song, which they performed with such gusto that even Legolas cracked a rare smile. The laughter was a balm against the weight of their mission, a reminder of the simple joys that still existed in a world overshadowed by darkness. Gandalf himself found solace in these moments, his deep chuckle rising above the crackling fire as he puffed on his pipe. The hobbits, though small in stature and unaccustomed to hardship, began to show their resilience. Frodo, despite the growing burden of the ring, walked without complaint. Sam's steadfast loyalty never wavered, and he often lightened Frodo's load with a quiet word or a steadying hand. Merry and Pippin, the less experienced, demonstrated their own form of bravery. When an unexpected storm forced the Fellowship to seek shelter, it was Pippin who scouted ahead, finding a hollow beneath a fallen tree where they could wait out the rain. Boromir, initially skeptical of the hobbits, began to see their value. "There is more strength in them than I thought," he admitted to Aragorn one night as they stood watch. "Perhaps Gandalf saw what I could not." Among the most surprising developments was the tentative bond forming between Legolas and Gimli. Though their conversations were often laced with jests and pointed remarks, a subtle respect began to take root. When Gimli stumbled on a loose stone during a treacherous climb, it was Legolas who extended a hand to steady him. "Careful, Master Dwarf," he said with a wry smile. "The stones are not as forgiving as your kin." "And yet I remain upright," Gimli grumbled, though he accepted the help. In turn, Gimli shared tales of his people's craftsmanship and the majesty of the dwarven halls, and Legolas listened with genuine curiosity. Slowly, their shared experiences began to erode the barriers of mistrust. Through it all, Gandalf moved among the Fellowship with a quiet wisdom. He was a figure of strength when morale faltered, a source of laughter when spirits grew heavy, and a guiding voice when the path was uncertain. "Each of you has something to offer," he reminded them during a rare moment of stillness. "This journey will test you, but it will also reveal your true selves. Trust in each other, for that trust will be your greatest weapon against the darkness." The path to Mordor was never meant to be easy, and the Fellowship's resolve faced its first true trial in the snowy peaks of the Misty Mountains. Caradhras, the Cruel, loomed ahead, a jagged and foreboding range that seemed to rise endlessly into the gray sky. To cross these mountains was perilous, but Gandalf knew it was the safest route, avoiding the spies and forces of Sauron that scoured the lowlands. As the Fellowship ascended, the air grew thinner and colder. Frost clung to their cloaks, and the biting wind howled around them, carrying with it the sharp sting of ice. Snowdrifts made each step a struggle, and even the hardiest among them began to feel the toll of the journey. The hobbits, unused to such harsh conditions, huddled together for warmth. Sam stayed close to Frodo, shielding him from the worst of the wind with his own body. Merry and Pippin tried to lighten the mood by making snowballs, but their attempts at levity were short-lived as the weather worsened. Gimli grumbled under his breath, his axe slung over his shoulder. "This mountain has no love for dwarves, or anyone else, it seems." "Perhaps it's your singing that offended it," Legolas quipped, his elven feet light and unaffected by the deep snow. Gimli shot him a glare but said nothing, the frost stealing his words. The Fellowship pressed on, but Caradhras seemed intent on driving them back. Snow began to fall more heavily, turning the path ahead into a white abyss. Loose rocks tumbled down the slopes, dislodged by unseen forces, and an eerie sense of malice seemed to emanate from the mountain itself. "This is no natural storm," Aragorn said, his voice low as he scanned the swirling snow. "The mountain resists us." Gandalf, his staff glowing faintly, nodded grimly. "Caradhras is ancient and proud. It does not welcome intruders, especially those who carry burdens such as ours." As the storm grew fiercer, the Fellowship struggled to stay together. Frodo, weary and burdened by the ring, stumbled, but Boromir was there to catch him. "Stay close," Boromir said, his tone firm but protective. "We cannot afford to lose anyone here." Even Legolas, unaffected by the snow's depth, looked troubled. "We must turn back," he urged. "This storm will bury us if we linger." Faced with the mountain's wrath, Gandalf called for the Fellowship to gather beneath a rocky overhang. The wind howled around them, but the shelter provided a brief reprieve from the snow. "This path is lost to us," Gandalf admitted, his voice heavy with reluctance. "The mountain will not let us pass." Boromir, his arms crossed, looked out into the storm. "Then where do we go? Back to Rivendell? Or do we wander in the wilderness until the enemy finds us?" "No," Aragorn said, his voice steady. "There is another way. Through the mines of Moria." At the mention of Moria, Gimli's face lit with pride. "The great halls of my people. A mighty place filled with wonders of dwarven craftsmanship. It is a path worthy of the Fellowship." But Gandalf's expression darkened. "Moria is not the sanctuary it once was," he said. "There are dangers there, older and darker than the orcs who roam the surface. I do not wish to take that road, but it may be our only choice." The Fellowship debated their next course of action, each voice weighed with equal measure. Even the hobbits, despite their inexperience, spoke their minds. Sam worried about what lay in the dark, while Frodo quietly accepted that they would go wherever they must. Ultimately, Gandalf made the final decision. "We will try the pass no longer. If the mountain rejects us, we must face the depths of Moria." The Fellowship descended carefully from Caradhras, their spirits dampened but their resolve intact. Though they had failed to cross the mountains, the trial had drawn them closer. In the face of the mountain's fury, they had protected one another, forging bonds of trust that would carry them through the greater perils to come. The Fellowship's path led them to the western edge of the Misty Mountains, where the long-forgotten gates of Moria stood hidden in shadow and stone. The once thriving dwarven kingdom, known as Khazad-dûm in its glory days, had fallen into ruin, its halls overtaken by darkness. For Gandalf, it was a reluctant choice, but the mountain of Caradhras had left them no other option. The journey to the gates was fraught with an eerie stillness. The land around the entrance was barren, the air heavy with a sense of foreboding. Only the faint sound of the Fellowship's footsteps broke the silence, and even that seemed muffled, as if the very ground swallowed the noise. As they neared, Frodo caught sight of a great stone wall etched into the mountainside. It was covered in moss and faded with age, but when the moonlight touched it, a silvery glow began to appear. Intricate lines of elvish script and dwarven runes shimmered to life, forming a grand archway, the doors of Durin. "Speak, friend, and enter," Gandalf murmured, reading the inscription aloud. He traced the glowing lines with his hand, his brow furrowed in thought. An invitation, though one not easily fulfilled. The Fellowship gathered before the gates, their expressions a mix of curiosity and unease. Gandalf stood at the center, his staff raised as he began to mutter incantations in various tongues. Each word echoed faintly, but the doors remained closed. "What is he doing?" Pippin whispered to Merry, his voice low. "Trying to open the doors, obviously," Merry replied, though he looked no less puzzled than his cousin. Gimli stepped forward, his voice tinged with impatience. "Surely the secrets of my own kin should not elude us. Let me try." He placed his hands firmly on the doors and pushed, his strength straining against the ancient stone. But the doors did not budge. "It's not a matter of strength," Legolas said softly, his keen eyes studying the glowing runes. After several attempts, Gandalf let out a frustrated sigh. "The solution lies not in magic or might, but in simplicity. Speak, friend, and enter." His voice trailed off, and then, as if struck by sudden clarity, he smiled. "Ah, of course." Turning to the doors, Gandalf spoke a single word in the elvish tongue, "Melon." With a deep groan, the stone doors began to part, revealing the dark maw of Moria beyond. The Fellowship stepped back as a rush of stale air greeted them, carrying with it the scent of dust and decay. Beyond the gates lay a vast darkness, impenetrable and foreboding. Frodo felt a chill run down his spine as he peered into the blackness. "What lies within?" he asked quietly. Gimli's voice was filled with both pride and sorrow. "The halls of my ancestors, carved from the heart of the mountain. Once, Khazad-dûm was the greatest of all dwarven kingdoms. But now," he trailed off, his eyes downcast. Gandalf placed a reassuring hand on Gimli's shoulder. "We will tread carefully," he said, his voice steady. "But remember, the way is long and the shadows deep. Keep close and trust in one another." The Fellowship entered the gates, their footsteps echoing faintly in the vast emptiness. Gandalf's staff emitted a soft light, illuminating the immediate area but leaving the distant walls shrouded in shadow. The air was cold and still, thick with the weight of ages. Sam clutched his pack tightly, glancing nervously at the towering walls. "It feels like the mountain's watching us," he muttered. "Better it be the mountain than something else," Aragorn replied, his hand resting on the hilt of his sword. As they ventured deeper, the scale of Moria began to reveal itself. Massive pillars carved with intricate designs stretched toward the ceiling, disappearing into the darkness above. Broken stones and discarded tools littered the ground, silent remnants of the dwarves who had once called this place home. But even in the grandeur of the architecture, an unease lingered. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the distant sound of dripping water. The Fellowship felt the weight of the mountain pressing down on them, as if the shadows themselves carried the memories of what had been lost. As the Fellowship delved deeper into Moria, the oppressive silence gave way to faint echoes, the sound of their footsteps bouncing off unseen walls, the occasional drip of water from the heights above. The vastness of the halls was both awe-inspiring and unsettling, a testament to the grandeur of the dwarves who had once shaped this kingdom from the stone of the mountain. In the dim light of Gandalf's staff, the Fellowship caught glimpses of Moria's former glory. Immense pillars carved with dwarven runes stretched upward, disappearing into the darkness above. Ornate bridges spanned deep chasms, their edges adorned with intricate designs of stone and metal. Gimli's voice was thick with emotion as he spoke. "Here stood the halls of Durin's folk, the pride of the dwarves. These pillars held feasts and songs, and the echoes carried our laughter through the mountain." The others listened in reverent silence, their eyes scanning the towering architecture. Even Legolas, who had been wary of entering the dwarven realm, seemed moved by the beauty of the stonework. Yet, for all its grandeur, Moria felt abandoned, its glory overshadowed by the weight of time and loss. Dust coated the intricate carvings, and the air carried the faint, bitter scent of decay. As they moved further into the mountain, the sense of unease grew. The corridors seemed to stretch endlessly, the shadows at their edges shifting and twisting in the flickering light. "Does anyone else feel like they're being watched?" Pippin whispered, his voice barely audible. "You're imagining things," Merry replied, though his own hand tightened on the hilt of his dagger. Gandalf, walking at the front of the group, paused to study their path. "Moria is vast," he said, his voice steady but quiet. "Its tunnels twist and turn, and its depths hold many secrets. Stay close, and do not wander." Frodo, clutching the ring beneath his cloak, felt its weight growing heavier with each step. A cold unease crept into his thoughts, as if the shadows themselves were aware of its presence. The Fellowship came upon a vast chamber, its ceiling so high that even Gandalf's light could not reach it. In the center of the room stood a stone pedestal, its surface covered in dust and debris. Gimli approached it cautiously, brushing away the dirt to reveal a carved inscription. "It's a tomb," he said, his voice trembling. "Balin, son of Fundin, Lord of Moria." A heavy silence fell over the group as they realized the fate of Gimli's kin. Gandalf placed a hand on the pedestal, his expression grave. "So it is true," he murmured. "Balin sought to reclaim Moria, but it seems he and his people fell to darkness." Boromir, standing guard at the edge of the room, spoke in a low voice. "This place is a tomb, Gandalf. We should not linger." As the Fellowship prepared to move on, a loud, metallic clatter echoed through the chamber. Everyone turned to see Pippin, his face pale as he stared at the well beside him. A rusted bucket, dislodged by his curiosity, tumbled into the depths, its sound growing fainter until it was swallowed by silence. "What did you do?" Aragorn hissed, his hand gripping his sword. I didn't mean to," Pippin stammered, his voice shaking. For a moment, all was still. Then, from somewhere deep within the mountain, a distant, rhythmic sound began to grow, slow, deliberate, like the beating of an ancient drum. "Drums," Legolas said, his keen ears catching the sound first. "Drums in the deep." Gandalf's expression darkened as he motioned for the group to move. "We must leave. Now." The rhythmic sound of drums echoed louder and louder, reverberating through the stone halls of Moria. The Fellowship moved quickly, their footsteps muffled by the oppressive weight of the darkness surrounding them. Fear began to seep into their hearts, for the ancient silence of Khazad-dûm had been broken, and its shadowy depths stirred with malice. "Faster," Gandalf urged, his staff glowing faintly in the gloom. "We must stay ahead of them. Do not look back." The Fellowship hurried through narrow corridors and vast chambers, their breathing heavy and their hearts racing. The air grew colder, and the sound of the drums was joined by guttural cries, inhuman voices echoing with bloodlust. Legolas stopped abruptly, his sharp eyes scanning the darkness. "They are close," he said, his voice tense. "Orcs. Many of them." "Let them come," Gimli growled, hefting his axe. "They will taste dwarven steel." "We cannot fight them all," Aragorn countered, his hand gripping his sword. "Our task is to protect Frodo and move forward." "Gandalf, where to?" "This way," the wizard replied, motioning toward a stairwell that spiraled downward. "Stay close and keep moving." As they descended, the enemy struck. Arrows whistled out of the shadows, clattering against the stone walls. The Fellowship drew their weapons, forming a defensive circle as the orcs charged. The battle was chaotic. Aragorn and Boromir stood at the forefront, their swords flashing in the dim light. Legolas's arrows flew true, each shot finding its mark. Gimli fought with fierce determination, his axe cutting through the advancing orcs. The hobbits, though unskilled in combat, stood their ground. Sam swung his frying pan with surprising ferocity, while Merry and Pippin used their daggers to fend off attackers. Frodo, clutching Sting, stayed close to Gandalf, who wielded his staff and sword with deadly precision. "Hold the line," Gandalf commanded, his voice cutting through the chaos. "We cannot falter here." The tide of orcs seemed endless, but then, as if responding to an unseen command, they halted. The remaining creatures fled into the shadows, their cries of rage replaced by a chilling silence. "What are they running from?" Boromir asked, his breath heavy. Legolas's face grew pale, his elven senses detecting what the others could not. "A Balrog," he whispered, his voice filled with dread. "A demon of the ancient world." Gandalf's expression darkened, and he gripped his staff tightly. "Durance Bane," he said grimly. "We must move, now. Run." The Fellowship raced through the halls, the sound of their footsteps drowned out by a deep, guttural roar that shook the very stone around them. The Balrog, wreathed in fire and shadow, loomed behind them, its presence a living nightmare. They reached the bridge of Khazad-dûm, a narrow span of stone that stretched over a seemingly bottomless chasm. Gandalf turned to the group, his voice firm. "Cross quickly. Do not look back." One by one, the Fellowship hurried across the bridge, their steps quickened by the heat of the Balrog's approach. Flames licked at the edges of the stone, and the air grew heavy with ash and smoke. As the last of the Fellowship reached the far side, Gandalf stood alone on the bridge, facing the advancing Balrog. His staff glowed brightly, and his voice rang out with authority. "You cannot pass." The Balrog roared, its fiery whip cracking against the stone. Gandalf struck the bridge with his staff, and the stone beneath the Balrog crumbled, sending the creature plummeting into the abyss. But as the demon fell, its whip lashed out, coiling around Gandalf's ankle and pulling him down with it. "Fly, you fools!" Gandalf shouted, his voice echoing as he disappeared into the darkness below. The Fellowship stood frozen, their faces pale with shock and grief. Aragorn was the first to recover, his voice steady but strained. "We must move. Gandalf gave his life so we could continue. We cannot let it be in vain." With heavy hearts, the Fellowship turned away from the chasm and began their escape from Moria. The light of Gandalf's staff was gone, but his sacrifice remained a beacon of hope, urging them onward. Emerging from the dark, oppressive depths of Moria, the Fellowship stumbled into the golden woods of Lothlorien. Here, the air was lighter, the light softer, and the burdens of the outside world seemed, for a fleeting moment, to lessen. Yet, their hearts were heavy with grief, for Gandalf, their guide and mentor, had fallen in the shadowed depths of Khazad-dûm. The forest of Lothlorien was like stepping into another world. Towering mullein trees with silver bark and golden leaves formed a canopy that shimmered in the sunlight. Beneath their branches, the earth was carpeted with soft moss, and the gentle sound of water flowing through hidden streams filled the air. The hobbits, still shaken from their harrowing escape, gazed around in awe. "It's like something out of a dream," Pippin murmured, his voice hushed. "It is beautiful," Frodo agreed, though his hand instinctively moved to the ring beneath his cloak. Even in this place of peace, he could feel its pull, a dark whisper against the light of the forest. Aragorn led the group forward, his steps steady but his expression heavy with loss. "Lothlorien is a refuge," he said quietly, "but it is also a place of wisdom. Perhaps here we will find the guidance we need." As the Fellowship ventured deeper into the woods, they were met by elven guards who escorted them to Cars Galadhon, the heart of Lothlorien. There, high in the treetops, they climbed into the city of the Galadrim, a place of breathtaking beauty where the light of the stars seemed to linger even in the daytime. It was here that they met Galadriel, the Lady of Light, and her husband, Lord Celeborn. Galadriel's presence was both comforting and unnerving. Her piercing gaze seemed to see not only their faces but their very souls. "You carry great sorrow," she said, her voice like a melody. Her eyes lingered on Frodo, and for a moment it felt as though the ring itself recoiled under her gaze. "And yet, you are not without hope." Galadriel offered words of comfort to each member of the Fellowship, her wisdom a balm for their weary spirits. Yet she also spoke truths that were difficult to hear, truths that forced them to confront their fears and doubts. To Frodo, she said, even the smallest person can change the course of the future. To Aragorn, she reminded him of his destiny as Isildur's heir. And to Boromir, her words were a warning, though they carried no judgment, beware the temptation of power, for it seeks out even the strongest among us. In a quiet glade, Galadriel invited Frodo to look into her mirror, a silver basin filled with water. What you see may not come to pass, she warned, but it will show you what could be. As Frodo gazed into the water, images flashed before him, the Shire, burning, his friends in chains, the Eye of Sauron, vast and terrible, searching for him. The vision left him trembling, but Galadriel's voice steadied him. You cannot do this alone, Frodo, she said gently. But you were never meant to. Your strength lies not only within you, but in those who walk beside you. As the fellowship prepared to leave, Galadriel presented each of them with gifts. To Frodo, she gave a phial filled with the light of Erendel's star. May it be a light for you in dark places, she said, when all other lights go out. To Aragorn, she gave a sheath for his sword, and to Sam, a box of earth from her garden, a gift he would cherish deeply. The others received tokens of elven craftsmanship, daggers, bows, and cloaks woven with the magic of Lothlorien. The fellowship departed Lothlorien with heavy hearts, but the time spent in its golden light renewed their resolve. Leaving the golden haven of Lothlorien, the fellowship descended to the banks of the Anduin, the great river. Their journey by boat offered a moment of quiet, but beneath the surface of the flowing water and the gentle hum of nature, tension brewed within the group. The shadow of Mordor grew closer, and with it, the weight of the choices that lay ahead. The fellowship's elven-crafted boats glided silently over the river, their sleek forms cutting through the calm waters. The landscape around them was wild and beautiful, with dense forests rising on either side and distant mountains framing the horizon. The river's current carried them southward, and for a time it felt as though Middle-earth itself was holding its breath. Sam leaned over the edge of the boat, watching the sunlight dance on the water's surface. It's peaceful here, he said softly to Frodo, who sat beside him. Frodo nodded, but his hand instinctively clutched the ring beneath his cloak. Though the river seemed tranquil, Frodo felt the growing pull of the ring, its whispers more insistent with each passing day. In another boat, Boromir's gaze lingered on Frodo. His expression was troubled, his thoughts consumed by the ring. He had tried to push its allure from his mind, but the closer they came to Mordor, the more its power seeped into his heart. We cannot take it to Mordor, he said quietly to Aragorn, his tone almost pleading. It is folly. Dundor needs this weapon. With it, we could turn the tide against Sauron. Aragorn's jaw tightened, but his reply was calm. The ring is not a weapon, Boromir. It is a poison. You know this. Boromir turned away, frustration etched on his face. Perhaps you are afraid to claim it, he muttered, his voice barely audible over the sound of the river. Legolas, sitting in the lead boat with Gimli, spoke softly but firmly. The ring's power corrupts all who seek it. Even now, it sows division among us. We must remain united if we are to succeed. As the fellowship drifted further south, a sense of unease began to creep over them. Aragorn, ever vigilant, scanned the skies and the riverbanks. We are being followed, he said quietly to Gandalf's absence, his voice a reminder of their growing vulnerability. Gimli gripped his axe tightly. Let them come, he said. I'll split the skull of any who dare approach. But it was Legolas who spotted the threat first. Something in the water, he murmured, his keen eyes narrowing. A dark shadow rippled beneath the surface of the Anduin. Gollum, the wretched creature who had trailed the ring for countless years, clung to a floating log, his pale eyes fixed on Frodo. Though unseen by most of the Fellowship, his presence was a chilling reminder of the ring's long reach. The river carried the Fellowship closer to a crossroads. Aragorn knew that soon they would have to choose: continue south to Gondor, where Boromir's heart yearned to go, or head east toward Mordor, the heart of the Shadow. One evening, as the Fellowship rested on the riverbank, Frodo sat apart from the group, his thoughts heavy. Sam, ever watchful, approached him. "You all right, Mr. Frodo?" Frodo looked up, his face pale in the moonlight. "The ring grows heavier, Sam," he said quietly. "And I fear what lies ahead. What if I fail?" "You won't," Sam said firmly. "I won't let you. And neither will the others. You don't have to carry it alone." Frodo smiled faintly, though his eyes were still clouded with doubt. The Fellowship's journey down the Anduin brought them ever closer to the Falls of Rhoros, a roaring cascade that marked the end of their river passage. The thunder of the falls grew louder with each passing day, mirroring the tension rising within the group. Gandalf's absence was deeply felt. Without his guidance, the Fellowship seemed to drift, their purpose clear but their path uncertain. Each member wrestled with their own fears and doubts, and the shadow of the ring loomed over them all. The Fellowship reached the shores near the Falls of Rhoros, the thunderous cascade marking the end of their river passage. Here, in the shadow of great cliffs and amidst the roar of the falls, the bonds that had held them together would face their greatest test. Each member carried their own fears, doubts, and desires, and the weight of their mission bore down on them with crushing intensity. The group made camp on the eastern bank of the river, the thick forest providing some measure of concealment. Aragorn stood watch, his sharp eyes scanning the surrounding woods. Though they were far from any known settlement, he felt the presence of unseen eyes, watchful, waiting. "Tomorrow, we must decide our path," he said to Frodo, who sat nearby. "The ring's road lies east, to Mordor. But the way is treacherous, and the company is not whole." Frodo looked up at him, his face pale. "What if I choose wrong? What if the burden is too great?" Aragorn knelt beside him, his voice quiet but firm. "The burden is yours, Frodo. But you do not bear it alone. Whatever you decide, I will stand with you." As the others rested, Boromir wandered the edge of the camp, his thoughts troubled. The ring's presence gnawed at him, its whispers growing louder with each passing hour. It promised him the power to save Gondor, to drive back the darkness that threatened his people. He found Frodo sitting alone in a clearing, gazing out toward the river. The sight of the hobbit, so small and vulnerable, holding the fate of Middle-earth in his hands, was more than Boromir could bear. "Frodo," he said, stepping closer, his voice unusually soft. "Why do you hesitate? The ring is not meant to be destroyed, it is a gift. Together, we could use it to defeat Sauron. Think of what it could do for Gondor." Frodo rose, clutching the ring tightly. "You don't understand," he said, his voice trembling. "The ring cannot be used. It will only corrupt whoever wields it." Boromir's expression darkened. "Do not think me so weak," he snapped, stepping closer. "You are just a hobbit. What do you know of such matters?" Frodo took a step back, fear flashing in his eyes. "Stay away," he said, his voice firm despite his trembling hands. Boromir lunged, his hand outstretched. "Give it to me," he demanded, his voice breaking with desperation. Frodo slipped the ring onto his finger, vanishing from sight. Boromir stumbled, his rage dissipating as quickly as it had come. "Frodo," he whispered, falling to his knees. "Forgive me. What have I done?" Invisible, Frodo fled through the forest, the ring's whispers filling his ears. It promised safety, power, even escape from his burden. But Frodo's heart resisted, and he tore the ring from his finger as he reached a hill overlooking the river. There, Aragorn found him. "Frodo," he said gently, his hands raised in reassurance. "I am here to help." Frodo turned, tears in his eyes. "The Fellowship is breaking. I cannot take you all with me. It's too dangerous." Aragorn knelt before him, his expression steady. "I swore to protect you, Frodo. But I will not force your choice. If you believe you must go alone, then I will honor that. Go, and may your path remain hidden from the enemy." Before Frodo could respond, a horn echoed through the forest, the sound of Boromir's horn, blown in desperate alarm. Orcs, sent by Saruman, had found them. The Fellowship sprang into action, their swords flashing as they fought to protect one another. Boromir fought valiantly, his horn calling for aid as he defended Merry and Pippin from the orc horde. His strength was immense, but the enemy's numbers were overwhelming. Arrows pierced his chest, and he fell, mortally wounded, as the orcs carried the hobbits away. Aragorn arrived too late to save him, kneeling beside his fallen comrade. "Forgive me," Boromir whispered, his voice weak. "I tried to take the ring, but I fought for them, Aragorn. I fought for our people." "You did not fail," Aragorn said, his voice heavy with grief. "Rest now, son of Gondor. Your people will honor your sacrifice." Frodo, witnessing the chaos from a distance, made his choice. With Sam by his side, he took a boat and set out across the river, determined to carry the ring to Mordor alone. As the Fellowship regrouped, Aragorn, Legolas, and Gimli vowed to follow the orcs and rescue Merry and Pippin. Though their paths diverged, their purpose remained united. The Fellowship was broken, but its mission endured. As the Anduin's gentle current carried Frodo and Sam away from the Fellowship, the vastness of their task began to settle upon them. The river's surface shimmered under the light of the setting sun, but ahead, the landscape grew darker and more foreboding. The path to Mordor stretched before them, a journey not of hope, but of necessity. Frodo sat silently at the front of the small elven boat, his gaze fixed on the horizon. The weight of the ring pressed against his chest, a reminder of the burden he had chosen to carry. Beside him, Sam rode with steady determination, his expression a mix of worry and unwavering loyalty. "You shouldn't have come, Sam," Frodo said softly, breaking the heavy silence. "This is my burden to bear." Sam paused, his oars resting in the water. "I know, Mr. Frodo," he replied, his voice firm. "But I made a promise. I said I wouldn't leave you, and I won't, not for anything." Frodo turned to him, his eyes filled with gratitude and sorrow. "This road will be dangerous, Sam. It may lead to our deaths." "Then we'll face it together," Sam said simply. As they left the Anduin behind, the landscape grew harsher. The green hills and gentle woods of the north gave way to barren plains and jagged rocks. The air grew heavy, carrying the faint scent of ash and decay, as if the land itself recoiled from the shadow of Mordor. The two hobbits walked in silence, their feet sore and their packs heavy. Though the ring's pull was strongest on Frodo, Sam felt the weight of the journey in his own way. Every step deeper into this desolate land was a step further from the Shire, from home. But even in the bleakest moments, Sam's resolve never wavered. When Frodo faltered, Sam was there to steady him. When their food ran low, Sam rationed their supplies with meticulous care, always making sure Frodo ate first. Unbeknownst to them, they were not alone. In the darkness, Gollum crept after them, his pale form blending with the shadows. His eyes gleamed with a dangerous hunger, fixed on the precious treasure that Frodo carried. One night, as Frodo and Sam camped beside a small stream, Gollum made his move. Slipping through the underbrush with eerie silence, he reached for the ring. But Sam, ever watchful, sprang to his feet and tackled the creature. "Get off him, you filthy sneak!" Sam shouted, wrestling with Gollum. The struggle ended when Frodo, his sword sting in hand, pointed it directly at Gollum's throat. The creature froze, his wide eyes filled with terror. "Don't kill us, precious!" Gollum hissed, his voice a rasping whimper. "We means no harm." Frodo hesitated, lowering his sword. "You've followed us all this way. Why?" Gollum's gaze flicked to the ring, his hands twitching. "We wants it. We needs it," he said, his voice dripping with desperation. "But we can help you, yes. We knows the way into Mordor." Sam scowled. "You trust him, Mr. Frodo? After what he's done?" Frodo looked at Gollum, his expression conflicted. "He may be our only guide," he said quietly. With a rope tied around Gollum's neck, Sam kept a close eye on the creature as they continued their journey. Though Sam distrusted him, Frodo saw something in Gollum that gave him pause, a reflection of what the ring could do to even the strongest of wills. "You were like me once, weren't you?" Frodo asked Gollum one night as they rested. "Before the ring." Gollum looked away, his voice trembling. "Smeagol was. Smeagol was good, yes. But the precious, it twists us. It breaks us." Frodo's hand touched the ring beneath his shirt. "Then there's hope for you yet." Sam muttered under his breath, his distrust of Gollum undiminished. But he said nothing, focusing instead on preparing what little food they had left. Guided by the wary and treacherous Gollum, Frodo and Sam ventured deeper into the desolation beyond the Anduin. The land grew darker and more hostile with every step, leading them to the edges of the dead marshes, a bleak expanse of waterlogged ground and twisted reeds. The air was heavy with the stench of decay, and a low mist clung to the earth like the ghost of an ancient sorrow. The first thing Frodo and Sam noticed was the silence. No birds sang, no insects buzzed, only the faint, sloshing sound of their steps through the muck disturbed the stillness. Even Gollum seemed subdued, his usual muttering reduced to whispers as he crept ahead, his thin frame darting between the tall reeds. "Careful, hobbitses," Gollum hissed, his pale eyes scanning the murky water. "Tricky place, yes. Must follow Smeagol. Follow close." Sam scowled, gripping his pack tightly. "And why should we trust you to lead us through this swamp? Seems to me you'd like to see us lost out here." "Smeagol doesn't want to hurt the hobbits," Gollum croaked, his voice trembling. "But the marshes do. They eats the careless." "Yes, they do." As the sun began to set, the marshes revealed their true nature. Strange, ghostly lights flickered over the water, casting an eerie glow. Frodo stopped, his eyes drawn to the faint shapes beneath the surface. There, just beneath the water, were faces. Pale and twisted, they stared upward with lifeless eyes, their expressions frozen in anguish. Some wore ancient armor, their hands clutching broken weapons, while others appeared as shadowy figures, barely distinguishable from the murk around them. "The dead marshes," Gollum whispered, his voice heavy with dread. "They fell here, long ago. Elves, men, orcs, all in the great battle. The marsh swallowed them, yes it did." Frodo knelt by the water, transfixed by the faces below. He felt a pull, not unlike the ring's call, drawing him closer to the surface. The ghostly lights seemed to dance in his vision, hypnotic and terrible. "Mr. Frodo!" Sam's voice cut through the haze, and his hand gripped Frodo's arm, pulling him back. "Don't look at them. They're not for you." Frodo blinked, shaking his head as if waking from a dream. I didn't mean to," he murmured, his voice trembling. "Stupid hobbits," Gollum hissed. "Don't follow the lights. Don't look at the faces. They'll pull you down." "Yes, they will." The marshes were treacherous, each step a gamble between firm ground and a watery grave. Gollum moved with ease, his twisted form slipping through the muck like a creature born to it. Frodo and Sam struggled to keep up, their feet sinking into the mud with every step. Sam's patience wore thin as the journey dragged on. "If we're going to follow this slimy creature, he'd better not lead us into one of those cursed pools," he muttered under his breath. "Smeagol knows the way," Gollum replied, his voice barely audible over the squelch of their footsteps. "Not safe, but it's the only way." At one point, Frodo slipped, his foot plunging into a deep patch of water. Sam was at his side in an instant, pulling him back to solid ground. "Steady, Mr. Frodo. We've come too far to lose you now." Frodo managed a weak smile. "Thank you, Sam. I don't know what I'd do without you." As the journey continued, the ring's pull on Frodo grew stronger. Its whispers blended with the voices of the dead, a cacophony of despair that gnawed at his resolve. Gollum noticed, his pale eyes narrowing as he watched Frodo. "Master feels it," Gollum said one evening as they rested on a dry patch of ground. "The weight of the precious. It eats at you." "Smeagol knows." Frodo looked at Gollum, his gaze softening. "You've carried it before. You understand." Gollum's face twisted, torn between pride and shame. "Yes. Smeagol knows. But it is cruel, the precious. It doesn't love us. It only wants to be found." Sam, sitting nearby, glared at Gollum. "Don't go filling his head with your nonsense. He's not like you." But Frodo's expression remained thoughtful, his grip on the ring tightening. Beyond the dead marshes, the land grew harsher and more foreboding. Jagged rocks jutted from the cracked earth, and the sky above was a heavy, iron gray. The oppressive air carried a faint sulfuric scent, a harbinger of the fiery realm that lay ahead. Frodo, Sam, and Gollum trudged onward until the black gate of Mordor loomed before them, a vast and menacing structure that seemed to rise from the very bones of the earth. The black gate, or the Morannon, stretched across the horizon like a vast, dark scar. Its massive, iron-clad doors stood closed, flanked by towering battlements and cruel spikes. Orcs patrolled its walls, their movements sharp and mechanical, like cogs in an unfeeling machine. Above it all, dark clouds churned, as if even the sky conspired to conceal the horrors within. Sam shuddered as he took in the sight. "We can't go through there," he whispered, his voice barely audible. Not without being seen. Gollum, crouched low to the ground, hissed in agreement. No, no, no! The hobbits cannot go this way. The gate is watched, always watched. Frodo's eyes were fixed on the gate, his expression unreadable. It's the only way, he said quietly. The ring must be destroyed. But not this way. Gollum exclaimed, his voice rising in panic. Smeagol knows another way. A secret way. Frodo turned to Gollum, his gaze piercing. What do you mean? What way? Gollum's thin lips twisted into a nervous smile. Through the mountains, yes. A path that the orcs do not watch. But it is dangerous. Oh yes, very dangerous. Sam stepped between them, his suspicion evident. And why should we trust you, eh? You just as soon lead us into a trap. Smeagol wants to help, Gollum whined, shrinking back. Wants to serve the master. The precious must be destroyed, yes? Smeagol will show the way. Frodo studied Gollum, the doubt in his heart warring with his growing sympathy for the wretched creature. Finally, he nodded. If there's another way, we'll take it. Let us. Sam's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. His loyalty to Frodo outweighed his mistrust of Gollum, and he resolved to stay vigilant. As they turned away from the black gate, Frodo paused, casting one last glance at the towering structure. The enormity of their task pressed down on him, heavier than the ring itself. How could they succeed against such overwhelming darkness? Sam noticed Frodo's hesitation and placed a hand on his shoulder. Don't you worry, Mr. Frodo. We'll find a way. We always do. Frodo managed a faint smile. Thank you, Sam. I don't think I could do this without you. With Gollum leading the way, the trio began a treacherous journey toward the mountains. The land grew steeper, the paths narrower, and the air colder. Yet, even in this desolation, Frodo clung to a fragile hope, a belief that their quest, no matter how impossible, was worth continuing. The black gate remained behind them, its shadow long and unyielding. Ahead lay the secret path Gollum had promised, a way into the heart of Mordor that would test their courage and trust like never before. Guided by Gollum, Frodo and Sam began the climb toward the mountains of Mordor. The path Gollum had promised was no road, but a treacherous trail through jagged rocks and crumbling cliffs, leading toward the dreaded pass of Cirith Ungol. The air grew thinner, the land colder, and the weight of the ring pressed harder upon Frodo with every step. The path was narrow and steep, winding its way along cliffs that seemed to drop into endless blackness. Loose stones shifted underfoot, and the wind howled through the jagged peaks like the wails of forgotten spirits. Careful, Mr. Frodo, Sam warned, reaching out to steady him as Frodo stumbled on a loose rock. Frodo managed a faint smile. I'm all right, Sam. Just tired. Not much further, Gollum rasped from ahead, his pale form darting between the rocks. Smeagol knows the way. Oh yes. Through the tunnel, and then the dark land is before us. Sam muttered under his breath, his distrust of Gollum growing with each step. I don't like the sound of that tunnel. As they climbed higher, the air grew heavy with an unnatural stillness. The only sound was the scrape of their footsteps and the occasional muttering of Gollum. Even the stars above seemed dimmer, as though they too shied away from this cursed land. Do you feel it, Sam? Frodo asked quietly, his voice trembling. Feel what, Mr. Frodo? The ring. It's heavier here. like it knows we're getting close. Sam placed a reassuring hand on Frodo's shoulder. Then we'll just have to carry it a bit further. You're not alone in this, remember? Frodo nodded, though the shadows in his eyes did not lift. Eventually, the narrow path opened into a dark crevice in the mountainside. The entrance to the tunnel was jagged and gaping, like the mouth of a great beast. A foul stench emanated from within, and the air seemed to grow colder as they approached. "This is the way," Gollum whispered, his voice barely audible. "Through the tunnel, yes. Smeagol has led you true." Sam wrinkled his nose at the smell. "I don't like this." "Not one bit." Frodo hesitated at the entrance, the darkness within seeming almost alive. "What's in there, Gollum?" he asked. Gollum avoided his gaze, his body twisting nervously. "Nothing. Just a passage. Safe enough if you're quick, yes, quick and quiet." Sam stepped forward, his tone sharp. "You better not be leading us into a trap, you slinking creature. If anything happens to Mr. Frodo..." "Smeagol wouldn't hurt Master." Gollum interrupted, his voice rising in panic. "Smeagol swore. This is the only way." Frodo placed a hand on Sam's arm. "We have no choice," he said softly. "We have to trust him." With a deep breath, Frodo stepped into the tunnel, the darkness swallowing him almost immediately. Sam followed close behind, his hand gripping the hilt of his sword. Gollum slunk in after them, his pale eyes gleaming faintly in the dim light. The tunnel was narrow and oppressive, the walls damp and slick with something that smelled of decay. Every step echoed faintly, and the air was thick with the sense of something unseen, watching. Sam's voice broke the silence. "I don't like this, Mr. Frodo. Feels like we're walking into a trap." "Just stay close, Sam," Frodo replied, though his own voice betrayed his fear. As they moved deeper into the tunnel, Gollum's muttering grew quieter, his form disappearing into the shadows ahead. Sam glanced around, his suspicions flaring. "Where's he gone?" Frodo stopped, his heart pounding. "Gollum? Are you there?" But there was no reply. The tunnel's oppressive silence returned, broken only by the faint sound of dripping water. And then, from somewhere deep within the blackness, a sound, a faint, slithering noise, growing closer. The air within the tunnel grew colder and fouler as Frodo and Sam ventured deeper into the abyss. The walls seemed to close in around them, the oppressive weight of the mountain pressing down on their weary spirits. Gollum had disappeared into the shadows, his muttering replaced by an ominous silence. Frodo's grip tightened on Sting, the faint blue glow of the blade offering the only light in the suffocating darkness. The tunnel floor grew sticky, and Frodo stumbled, his hand brushing against something soft and clinging. Holding Sting closer, he saw what it was, a mass of thick, glistening webs stretching from wall to wall. "Spider's work," Sam muttered, his voice grim as he drew his sword. "Big spider's work, by the looks of it." Frodo's heart raced as he examined the web. The strands were impossibly thick, stronger than any he had seen before. "What kind of spider could weave something like this?" he whispered, though he feared he already knew the answer. The faint, slithering noise from earlier grew louder, echoing through the tunnel like the hiss of escaping steam. Suddenly, from the shadows ahead, Gollum's voice echoed, high-pitched and taunting. "Yes, precious, they come to her. Smeagol brings them, yes. The fat one and the master, juicy little morsels." Sam's fury boiled over, his voice roaring through the tunnel. "You filthy, treacherous wretch. I knew it. I knew you'd lead us to our deaths. But Gollum's laughter faded into the darkness, leaving the hobbits alone once more. Frodo's face paled. We've been led into a trap, he said, his voice trembling. Sam placed a steadying hand on Frodo's shoulder. We'll get out of this, Mr. Frodo. We've been through worse. But even as he spoke, doubt gnawed at his resolve. A massive shadow loomed at the edge of the faint light from Sting, its shape monstrous and alien. Shelob, an ancient spawn of darkness, emerged from the depths of her lair. Her 8 legs moved with unnatural speed, her bloated body glistening with malice. Her many eyes gleamed, reflecting the faint light like black mirrors, and her fangs dripped with venom that hissed as it touched the ground. Sam raised his sword, his voice trembling but resolute. Come on, you great ugly brute. Let's see what you've got. Shelob lunged, her massive form filling the tunnel. Frodo swung Sting, the blade slicing through one of her legs. The creature screeched, the sound reverberating through the cavern like 1,000 nails on stone. In the chaos, Frodo became separated from Sam, his focus solely on escaping the creature's deadly grasp. But Shelob was cunning, and as Frodo turned a corner, she struck. Her venomous stinger pierced his side, and Frodo crumpled to the ground, Sting falling from his grasp. No! Sam cried, his voice breaking as he fought his way toward Frodo. Shelob loomed over Frodo's still form, her fangs ready to strike again. With a roar of defiance, Sam charged at Shelob, his sword gleaming in the dim light. He struck with all his strength, driving the blade into one of her eyes. Shelob reeled back, screeching in pain, and Sam pressed his attack, slashing at her legs and forcing her to retreat into the shadows. Panting, Sam fell to his knees beside Frodo, his hands trembling as he turned his friend over. Frodo's face was pale, his body still. He's gone, Sam whispered, tears streaming down his face. Oh, Mr. Frodo, what have I done? But as he grieved, he noticed something, Frodo's chest rising and falling, faint but steady. He's alive, Sam exclaimed, relief flooding through him. You're still with me, Mr. Frodo. And I'll get you out of here, no matter what. Sam picked up Sting and the phial of Galadriel, its light shining brilliantly as he held it high. A light when all other lights go out, he murmured, his voice filled with hope. The glow from the phial filled the tunnel, driving back the shadows and forcing Shelob to retreat deeper into her lair. Carrying Frodo, Sam made his way out of the tunnel, the light of Galadriel guiding their steps. Emerging from Shelob's lair, Sam found himself alone with Frodo's limp form. Though Frodo still lived, the venom coursing through his veins had rendered him unconscious. Their journey seemed at a standstill, and before Sam could formulate a plan, disaster struck. From the shadows came the harsh cries of orcs. A patrol from the nearby tower of Cirith Ungol had found them. Before Sam could defend his master, the orcs seized Frodo, carrying him away toward the forbidding fortress perched high on the cliffs above. As the orcs disappeared into the distance, Sam's knees buckled, and he sank to the ground, his heart heavy with despair. They've taken him, he whispered, his voice breaking. I've failed him. But then, his hand brushed against the phial of Galadriel, its light faint but steady. Galadriel's words echoed in his mind, may it be a light for you in dark places, when all other lights go out. Resolve surged within him. No, Sam said, rising to his feet. I haven't failed. Not yet. Gripping Sting tightly, he set off toward the tower, determined to save Frodo at any cost. The fortress loomed above, its dark spires twisting upward like claws. The air was thick with the stench of death and decay, and the harsh sounds of orcs arguing echoed through the night. Sam crept along the rocky path leading to the entrance, his every step careful and silent. Through a crack in the gate, Sam peered inside. The orcs were in chaos, fighting among themselves. The reason was clear: Frodo's mithril coat, a treasure so rare that it had incited greed and bloodlust among the orcs. Sam saw an opportunity. While the orcs were distracted, he slipped into the tower, his heart pounding. Navigating the dark, narrow corridors of Cirith Ungol was no easy task. The walls oozed with filth, and the air was suffocating. But Sam pressed on, driven by his unwavering loyalty to Frodo. At one point, he encountered an orc guard. Though fear surged within him, Sam raised Sting and confronted the creature. To his surprise, the orc hesitated, its eyes widening at the sight of the glowing blade. Elvish steel, it hissed before turning to flee. Sam's courage grew with each step. He climbed higher, following the sound of the orcs bickering until he reached a chamber at the top of the tower. There, bound and motionless, was Frodo. His pale face was etched with pain, but his chest rose and fell in shallow breaths. Sam's heart ached at the sight, but he quickly set to work cutting the ropes that bound his friend. "Mr. Frodo," Sam whispered, shaking him gently. "It's me, Sam. I've come to get you out of here." Frodo's eyes fluttered open, and he looked at Sam with a mixture of relief and confusion. "Sam, you came back." "I never left," Sam said firmly. "And I never will." As Frodo struggled to sit up, Sam helped him to his feet. The sound of orcs shouting below reminded them that time was short. "Come on," Sam urged. "We've got to move." With Sam supporting Frodo, the two hobbits made their way down the tower's winding stairs. The chaos among the orcs worked in their favor, as the creatures were too busy fighting each other to notice the hobbits slipping past. As they neared the exit, an orc spotted them and let out a guttural cry. The chase was on. Sam wielded Sting with surprising skill, fending off the first orc that lunged at them. Frodo, still weak but determined, clung to Sam's side as they darted through the shadows. The file of Galadriel illuminated their path, its light disorienting their pursuers. Finally, the two hobbits burst out of the tower and into the barren wasteland beyond. The orcs, unwilling to pursue them further, fell back, their guttural cries fading into the night. Safe for the moment, Frodo and Sam collapsed onto the rocky ground. The tower loomed behind them, a dark silhouette against the starless sky. "Thank you, Sam," Frodo said quietly, his voice filled with gratitude. "I don't know how you did it, but you saved me." Sam shook his head. "I just did what needed to be done, Mr. Frodo. We've come this far together, and we'll go the rest of the way together too." Frodo nodded, though his hand drifted to the ring beneath his shirt. Its pull was stronger than ever, and the journey ahead seemed impossibly long. But with Sam by his side, he found a sliver of hope to hold on to. And so, our journey through the tale of Gandalf, Frodo, Sam, and the Fellowship of the Ring comes to a close, for now. From the green hills of the Shire to the shadowed depths of Moria, from the golden light of Lothlorien to the desolate lands of Mordor, this has been a story of courage in the face of overwhelming darkness. It is a story of choices, to stand against fear, to trust in unlikely allies, and to take one step forward when the road seems impossible. But above all, it is a story of friendship. Frodo may have carried the ring, but it was the unwavering loyalty of Sam, the bonds forged within the fellowship, and the wisdom of Gandalf that gave him the strength to continue. Even in the darkest moments, they found light in each other. As we leave this tale for now, let us carry its lessons with us. Like Frodo and Sam, we may face burdens that seem insurmountable. Like Aragorn, we may doubt our strength or question our path. But as Gandalf reminded us, even the smallest person can change the course of the future. And sometimes, it is in the smallest acts of kindness, loyalty, and courage that true greatness is found. Thank you for joining me on this journey. Until next time, may the light of the stars guide you, and may you find strength in the fellowship of those who walk beside you. Good night, and farewell.